So the first thing for the usual folks in the crowd here, you know that I always start with an update on the Mars rovers. And first we'll start with Opportunity. And today is Martian Day 4685 since it landed in January of 2004. And I always have to remind myself, as well as everybody in the room, that this was intended to last 90 days. So we're certainly exceeded the expectation by about a factor of 50 or so. So here's where they've been over the last, what are we at, 13 years? And they landed up here, have spent a long time driving across the plains of what's called Meridiani Planum. And for the last about 3 years, they've been working their way along the edge of Endeavour Crater. Endeavour is a big hole in the ground about 20 kilometers across, so it would pretty comfortably occupy all of the metro area. And so I'll get a little closer here. And if you've got really good eyes, you'll see there's a yellow line sort of moving through here. But they've spent a lot of time investigating this valley called Marathon Valley. And over the last 3-4 months, they've exited that, and they're now working their way around the outside of the rim of the crater. And the target, if I can see it, is down here. There's a gully that cuts through the rim of the crater, and it is thought that that was caused by running water. And so this is a closer up view. Here's where they are right now. Maybe you can see that yellow line, but that's where they're sitting at today. This is the inside of Endeavour Crater. Here's this gully, and I think I'll get closer yet. So there's, we're at day 4685, so they're actually a little bit away from that milestone. And here's the gully. And so what they intend to do is get into it here and drive the length of the gully down to the bottom of the rim, and then use that as an entry point to actually drive into Endeavour Crater. And they expect they'll be reaching this later in the year. There's not a definite target date yet, but it'll likely be end of summer to sometime in the fall. So here's where they are, the most recent images over the last couple days. So here's the rim of the crater. We're looking south here. This is the crater itself off in this direction. And I think I've got another view here in the direction that they're driving. This was returned yesterday. And you can see that the outside of the crater, the plains, are very smooth and covered with very low ripples of sand. And by low, I mean about the height of a sidewalk curb. So it's easy for the rover to navigate that type of terrain. So one thing that's been going on for the last month, this is a global map of Mars, or a global image of Mars, returned from the Mars Color Imager on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. And Opportunity is sitting about right here. And what you'll notice, this repeats, is there's a very large dust storm that kicked up, and the dust is moving over this part of Mars. So one thing to keep an eye out for, this is the Valles Marineris system here, this huge 3,000 kilometer long canyon, and that's chock full of dust. But the implication for Opportunity is it's under a dust cloud. It's a solar powered spacecraft, and they're getting something like 40% of the amount of sunlight reaching the solar panels as they would if it was a normal clear sky. And so they've had to slow their activities. They typically are doing observations or measurements or driving on one day, and then they sit for 1 or 2 days recharging the batteries so that they have enough oomph to move on. So they've encountered this many times before, so they know what to do, but it it slows the progress for sure. Okay, so the recap for Opportunity, again, it's day 4685. They've driven a little over 40 kilometers and returned about 218,000 images so far. So lots of data that keep coming in. And they, I guess, late last fall, they were awarded from NASA another mission extension for 1 more Martian year, which is 2 Earth years. And so we're good until essentially the end of 2018 at this point in terms of the funding. And then well before that time, if the spacecraft is still healthy, they'll put in another proposal for a further mission extension. So far, they've extended it 8 times. So, okay, let's move across Mars to the other rover, Curiosity, and it landed in August of 2012, and so we're at day 1651 today, and this is sort of a selfie that Opportunity took by holding its robot arm out front and using the camera on the arm to collect its pictures of itself. And where it landed is the inside of Gale Crater. Gale is about a 150 kilometer diameter crater. There's a 5 kilometer high mountain in the center of the crater that's filled with sedimentary rocks. We'll look at that in a minute. And this was the target landing area, and they landed pretty much smack dab in the middle of it. And so here's the view from the surface of Mount Sharp, the mountain that they're interested in. And the intent of this mission is really to unravel the geologic history of this location on Mars. When you look at sedimentary rocks like this, layered deposits, the old stuff is on the bottom. The higher you get, the younger it gets. And so with all of their various instruments, they have the capability to unravel what the environment was like when those layers were laid down. And so we can see a climate history, if you will, for Mars by probing many of these layers. And so this is an overview of where they've been. This is where they landed. And over the last, 4.5 years, they've been working their way down here. Mount Sharp is down here. The reason that they've had to do this sort of circuitous route is this dark area is actually very thick sand dunes, and they couldn't just drive across that for fear of getting stuck. So they've been doing measurements and collecting samples along the way. And right now they're finally crossing the dunes, and this is a view of where they were 2 days ago or 3 days ago. And again, these are sand dunes. And this is the plan now for the future. So they're sitting about right here. And once they get through these dunes over the course of the rest of this year, they'll work their way up to this unit that has hematite in it. It's iron sulfate, and that can be diagnostic of a water environment. So a lake bed type environment. And so they want to measure that. And then there's clays in this area, and then sulfates in this area. So these are all created under very different environmental conditions. And so this is the near term, for the next, probably until the end of next year, plan of being able to sample those 3 units. And so here's where they are right now. This is looking down at the surface with the microscope camera. So this is, let me think. This is about, say, a foot across in the field of view that we have, or a third of a meter roughly. And what you see, here's the sand that forms these dunes, but in some areas the wind has removed the sand and it's sorted the debris that's on the surface, the little pebbles, and so you end up with pebbles that are very similar in size, and that's very diagnostic on the Earth of having an area where the wind is fairly repeatable, and it peaks at a certain velocity. It's not a big gusty thing where it's changing a lot with time. And so that says that we probably have conditions like that at this location on Mars. And this was taken 3 days ago. So here's the sand dunes and bedrock poking through, these layered rocks that they're interested in poking through. And that's just a nice sort of picturesque view of where they are. So you can see the sand ripples. And what they've done, they want to collect a sample of the sand. And so they did what's called a toe dip maneuver, where they just drove into the sand dune where the rear wheels of the rover are still out on dry ground, if you will, or not sandy ground. It's a solid surface, so they can pull themselves out if it proves to be deeper than what they think. And so they've left tire tracks here. And they decided that, yeah, it's okay to do this. And so they've extended the robot arm. And this is a view from the microscope camera. Again, so this is probably about 10 centimeters across. So I guess whatever that is, about 4 inches or so. So you can see the individual sand grains. So another thing they've been doing, and we've talked about this numerous times over the last several years, the wheels on Opportunity, it's got 6-wheel drive, and they're carved out of a solid block of aluminum, but they're very thin. They're about half the thickness of a dime. Along the wheel itself. And one thing they noticed about 2 years ago is that they were starting to get tears in the wheels, and that's from driving over sharp rocks. And so they've, wherever possible, have been trying to select smoother areas, if they have the choice, where you don't have to drive over rocks to help preserve these things. But what they noticed, this was late last month. I'm sorry, this was about 10 days ago. You're zooming in on this one, that the tread has actually broken off in a couple of places on this wheel. So it's not just holes poking in, it's these treads coming loose. And that actually is more of a problem, because a lot of the strength and rigidity of the wheel is in those treads. And so the thinking now is, since they see this break and on another part of the wheel there's another one of these has come off, that indicates they've got about 40% of the life of the wheel left. And so they think that should be good for the next several years, but they're still going to be very cautious as they move across the surface. So it's sort of, instead of being a robust rover, you don't just say, hey, I'm going to drive up the side of that mountain. It's like, well, okay, let's find the smooth way to go and avoid all these rocks that I really want to be sampling. So, but it's good to be aware of, and they're certainly monitoring this with time. This is another view. You can certainly see the breakage in these things. And so the question then is, we're launching another rover in 2020. It's called the Mars 2020 rover, surprise. Although I'm sure they'll come up with another name. But initially it was the same design as Curiosity. And they've come up with a new design for the wheels now. So here's just an artist's rendition of what the 2020 rover will look like. This is a closer up view of the wheels. So first of all, they're going to just about double the thickness of the wheels, but instead of having these little individual zigzags a la on Curiosity, they're adding a lot more just straight treads, and they think that, or at least their modeling and their testing on the ground indicates that will be a much more robust design for the wheels. So that's where they're going with that, and luckily that's a relatively straightforward thing to change. Okay, so let's recap Curiosity. Again, it's day 1651. They're almost at the 16-kilometer mark, and almost 400,000 images so far.